Hello fellow students, patients, professionals, and cannabis connoisseurs. Welcome to Project Stash Masters. I am your host, Stash Master Scotty. In today's episode, we will be discussing the endocannabinoid system, what it is, what it does for the body, and how it interacts with cannabinoids. Without any further introduction, let's get into it. The endocannabinoid system is a complex regulatory system that's spread all throughout the human body. Part of this endocannabinoid system is a series of G protein coupled receptors, better known as the CB1 and CB2 receptors. The primary role of these receptors is to regulate homeostasis in the body. These G protein coupled receptors, or GPCRs for short, react to both endogenous and exogenous cannabinoids in the body. Endogenous cannabinoids mean cannabinoids that occur inside of the body, and exogenous cannabinoids, meaning cannabinoids that occur outside of the body. We will dive deeper into the subject later in the video. Just note that endogenous means inside the body, and exogenous means outside of the body. The CB1 receptor, or the CB1R for short, is mostly responsible for the psychoactive effects of cannabis and is densely located in the nervous system. On the other hand, the CB2 receptor, CB2R for short, is mostly responsible for regulating the immune system. This system is incredibly important for life, Your Honor. In fact, it's so important that every animal on Earth with a spine is thought to have an endocannabinoid system. This includes dogs, cats, horses, birds, lizards, and even fish. This system is responsible for regulating countless biological functions such as analgesic regulation, which is pain regulation, regulation of inflammation, regulation of emesis, which is nausea, and much more. Now, I know that's a lot of medical jargon, so let's break down some of those complicated medical terms. GPCRs, as we said earlier, are G protein coupled receptors. And these G protein coupled receptors are proteins that are protruding from a cell surface of certain cells. G protein coupled receptors occur on both the surfaces of many different types of cells, and they function as a receiver for those cells, taking in and translating messages sent from other nearby cells. GPCRs are very common in nature and are commonly discussed without realizing it. For example, dopamine and serotonin receptors are usually GPCRs. These GPCRs we are specifically talking about here are part of this endocannabinoid system and are better known as the CB1 and CB2 receptors. So we have these cell surface receptors, and these receptors detect ligands outside of the cell. In biochemistry, ligands are molecules that are produced inside or outside of the body and interact with proteins, in this case, G protein coupled receptors, and are usually acting as a messenger between cells. Ligands can be a lot of different things. Hormones such as cortisol, neurotransmitters such as serotonin, or endocannabinoids like anandamide, or plant-derived cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids such as THC. These ligands bind to receptors and trigger cellular responses that in turn trigger physiological responses. In simpler terms, the body produces ligands to send messages which are received by a receptor and translated by the receiving cell. The important takeaway is this: there are CB1 and CB2 receptors, which are GPCRs, that together are known as the classical endocannabinoid receptors. To be fair, these are not the only receptors in the brain that interact with cannabinoids. You also have serotonin receptors, TPRV receptors, and even more GPCRs. There are also other receptors that may play a role in the larger endocannabinoidome, which is an expanded definition of the endocannabinoid system. But we will need to cover these other receptors in a later video. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. So we have our receptors, and these receptors interact with ligands. And these ligands can be either endogenous cannabinoids or exogenous cannabinoids. Let's start with the cannabinoids you already might be more familiar with. Exogenous cannabinoids are cannabinoid ligands that occur outside of the body. Most commonly, these cannabinoids are formed on the plant. Exogenous cannabinoids you are probably already familiar with would include THC, CBD, and the many other cannabinoids found on the cannabis plant. CBG, CBN, THCV, you get the point. To be clear, however, not all exogenous cannabinoids are produced by the plant. Those would be phytocannabinoids, which again are cannabinoids that are produced by plants. There are also other types of exogenous cannabinoids, such as synthetic cannabinoids, that are usually created in a lab. Now, phytocannabinoids and synthetic cannabinoids definitely deserve their own video, so please reach out in the comments below if you would like to see a video on synthetic cannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. Moving on, endogenous cannabinoids or endocannabinoids are cannabinoid ligands that are produced within the body. Some of the best known endocannabinoids are this beautiful mess of a word, which has been shortened to anandamide, also known as AEA for shorter, and 2-arachidonyl glycerol, or 2AG for short. These endocannabinoids do not occur on the plant, they are naturally present in the body. Please note that there are totally more endocannabinoids. These are just the two most frequently referred to. So, revisiting the original medical jargon from above. With everything that we have learned, it is clear that the endocannabinoid system is a series of G protein coupled receptors, better known as the CB1 and CB2 receptors. And it is these receptors, GPCRs, which react to both endogenous and exogenous ligands in the body. Now that we understand what the CB1 and CB2 receptors are and what they're doing, it is important to understand how they work. A couple of key terms that we will be using going forward are agonists and antagonists. Agonists will activate a GPCR, whereas an antagonist block it. It is important to keep in mind that this will work much more on a sliding scale rather than an on or off switch. For example, you can have a partial agonist. THC is considered to be a partial agonist at CB1 receptors, activating them, but not completely. This is different than CBD, which is considered to be more antagonistic and may reduce the effects of THC at CB1R. Please keep in mind that ligand's ability to be agonistic or antagonistic will vary depending on which receptor we're talking about. For example, a ligand may be an agonist at receptor A, but will be an antagonist at receptor B. So, cannabinoid ligands will bind to these cannabinoid receptors, but how does that elicit the physiological effects associated with cannabis? The reason why exogenous cannabinoids exert their effects in the first place is because they act a lot like endogenous cannabinoids. THC is an example of an exogenous cannabinoid acting similarly to endogenous cannabinoids, specifically 2AG and anandamide. So THC stimulates the CB1R by binding to and activating the receptor similarly to 2AG and anandamide. THC will elicit its physiological effects by being an agonist to both the CB1 receptor and CB2 receptor. THC will stimulate action on the brain by binding to the CB1 receptor as an agonist. This binding effect will inhibit neurotransmitter release. This activation of the CB1R causes an alteration of the neurotransmitters and activates physiological responses that include the classical THC high, but also sensations of pain relief, changes in appetite, changes in muscle activity, among other sensations. THC also stimulates other effects by binding to the CB1R and CB2R on organs, specifically the respiratory tract, the immune system, the gut, kidneys, and much more. It is worth keeping in mind that there are many slightly different but similar forms of THC, such as tetrahydrocannabivarin THCV, tetrahydrocannabinolic acid THCA, and even more, especially if we include metabolites like 11-hydroxy-delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. I hope to cover more of that in a later video, but until then, thank you for studying with us, and stay focused on the Maxime Siente, my friends. Thank you for watching our first video. This project has been a long time in the making, and I cannot wait to release our second episode. A big thank you to Dr. Codi Peterson for helping peer review this educational video. Please Don't forget to check out his Instagram page at CannabisPharmD and LinkedIn page at CannaPharmD. In the meantime, please remember to like and subscribe for more videos and content on medical cannabis science. Until then, Maxime Siente, my friends.